Ladies and gentlemen, what we have now is, on the face of it, something very particular, i.e. focusing on England, the English Arts Council England. But in principle, what you're going to say, Isabel, applies to Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland in the broadest terms. Yeah. Okay. So there's something I hope for everyone. Isabel has worked for Arts Council England in the Museums and Cultural Property team since 2011. So I think we're in pretty good hands. So I'll leave you to explain anything further.
Thank you. And it's great to be with you all. I've really enjoyed today's conference. It feels like a really lovely programme, and I hope this slot where I'm going to talk about the funds, project funds that are available in England to support your projects is a good sort of culmination towards the end of the day, because some of the projects we've heard about earlier in the day, like Sam's work around SEND in museums, and I was talking to Michelle earlier, and Tameside have had Arts Council project funding for a different project. So please do think of Arts Council England as somewhere that you can apply to for project funding, for projects that take place in England. But as was just mentioned, I think the principles around how to structure a successful funding bid apply whether you're in Wales, Scotland or Northern Ireland. We work really closely with our partner organisations there, Museums Galleries Scotland, the Welsh Government, Culture Division and Northern Ireland Museums Council. So I'm here to talk to you about our project funding that we have available to support your work, and I'm going to point out some of the factors that make a really strong and compelling application, those ingredients for a successful bid. As mentioned, I'm Isabel Wilson, and I'm Interim Director for Museums at Arts Council, but I've been there a long time, and prior to being at Arts Council, I had a long career working in local authority museums, one of which, Hitchin Museum as was, had a regimental collection within the galleries, the Hertfordshire Yeomanry. So just a bit about Arts Council England, because I know the name can be sort of off-putting in a sense to your sector, but I just really wanted to emphasise that since 2011, Arts Council England has been the national development agency for museums. And we distribute a range of funding to individuals, arts councils, museums and libraries. And we also run a range of schemes and programmes to help develop museums and collections, many of which you'll have engaged with. We run museum accreditation. We run the Acceptance in Lieu scheme, where preeminent objects are donated to public collections to offset death duty. We run the Government Indemnity Scheme, which offers free insurance to enable people to engage with high-quality collections, and the Reviewing Committee on the export of works of art and objects of cultural interest. But my focus today is on our funding, and I really wanted to draw attention to our strategy. I'm sure some of you have read our strategy, Let's Create, and it really is about our vision for how we want to see creativity and culture available to everyone across England. And it's a strategy that runs until 2030. So I think for those of you who haven't read it, I'd really encourage you to sit down with it with a cup of tea, try and get over the language of it, which I think will feel a little bit different to you. But the principles within it are really important. We talk about wanting creative people, so opportunities within museums for people to engage creatively. We talk about cultural communities, and that's where I think museums are really, really well placed. And we want a creative and cultural country. But the signposting aspect that I think is really important to hold on to is we talk about 4 investment principles. And these are really critical when you're thinking how to make a successful application to us. So we talk about the importance of ambition and quality, and that's really about ambition and quality in context. So it's about what will help to raise the public offer for people engaging with your museum, for example, or what will help around developing the quality of your collections and your organisation. We talk about dynamism, and there's a lot under that. So again, I'd encourage you to sort of take the time to read it. But part of that is about the right business models, it's about fundraising, it's about good use of audience data. So I think the talk that we just heard was really important. How do you develop a really, really data-informed sense of who your audiences are and what they want and need from your museum? We have a strand on environmental responsibility, and that might be about the stories that you tell within your museum, might be about, perhaps more obviously for a natural history type of museum, but it might be stories about the changing climate or biodiversity loss, or it might be around how to make aspects of your organisation more energy efficient, for example. And an important one as well is inclusivity and relevance, and that absolutely speaks to some of the projects that we've heard about today. You know, the work that Sam was promoting that's so vital around making museums inclusive and relevant for everyone. That's a really important investment principle that can help you frame an application to support that type of work. And despite our branding, I really want to emphasise that we're interested in all types of public museums and all types of collections. Across our funding, we have various programmes. Our biggest one, and where the bulk of our funding goes, we're funded partly by government, DCMS, Department of Culture, Media and Sport, but half of our funding comes from the lottery. The biggest amount of our funding goes out to national portfolio organisations, and they're funded on a 3 or 4 year cycle, and that can cover core funding, programme funding. We currently have almost 1,000 MPOs across England, and they're funded up until the end of March 2028. The Tank Museum at one stage was an MPO, but I think it no longer is. We also have strategic funding programmes focused on particular areas of urgent need in the sector. So we have the museums and, I'm trying to remember what MEN stands for, Museums, Estates and Development Funding, to help museums with essential backlogs of repairs, whether that's around roofs, drainage, boilers, etc. And the recently launched Museums Renewal Fund, which at this stage is focused on local authority reliant museums that are particularly flashing red for us. We have the National Lottery Project Grants, and they're what I'm going to focus on largely, but I'm also going to talk about museum development, which is our partnership programme, and I'm sure a lot of you engage with your local museum development providers. Really important that you do. Please do sign up to their newsletters. They're our sort of local development support on the ground, and they also provide small grants which can often act as a really useful gateway into a more ambitious bid into our National Lottery Project grants. So with these grants that we have available, oh, that did something funny, but it's come back. Someone in the room earlier asked a really good question of how much money do we have available through National Lottery Project grants, and I couldn't remember the figure. It'll be on our website, but it is a big, big scale of investment. And it's an open access fund, so we can fit with your timetable. There's no deadlines. And importantly, it's open to all types of public museums, not just accredited. We're also open to museums that haven't yet reached accreditation level or have chosen not to apply for accreditation. And it's available for individuals, so freelancers working with museums. And we have 3 bands. So we have the £1,000 to £30,000. And that application, once submitted, will be turned around in about 10 weeks. You'd hear the outcome. And then we have the larger scale, 30 to 100,000, and that just takes a little bit longer, I think sort of 14 or 15 weeks, and you hear back. And then the largest for national projects and really significant partnership projects and touring is projects over 100,000. When we make our decisions, we're looking in relation to your applications about feasibility and risk. We're thinking, you know, does this stack up? Is this a project that is going to be viable? And we're thinking about the relationship to those 3 outcomes I mentioned and to the investment principles. You don't have to meet all of them, but look at our criteria and make sure that you're meeting at least one of them. And on our website, there's lots of information about how to make an application. You might have heard we've had a bit of a debacle about our online application portal, but we've got a workaround, and the 1,000 to 100,000 grant programme is open again, and the over 100,000 will be open very shortly, I think mid-month. So in terms of project grants, a bit more detail. Projects can last for up to 3 years, so it gives you a good length of time to really develop your project. And because it's paid for by public money, it should absolutely have a focus on people experiencing or benefiting from the project. That can be a deferred benefit. So if it was about conservation of a particular item that ultimately was going to end up as a centrepiece in a gallery, that's absolutely fine. Deferred benefit is part of what we'll fund, but you really need to highlight that public benefit. And as mentioned at the outset, the funded activity needs to reach people in England. We can't fund activity that's already happened, and we can't fund core costs through project grants. And the important point, it does need to relate to our strategy. So think really hard about what makes a good idea for a project. I'm sure you've got things on your list that you want to develop at your museum that are time-limited projects. Really make that strong case for public benefit with a focus on audiences, which we heard a lot about in the previous talk. Think about the match funding element. What can you put in, or can you get anything from another funder to just help to indicate that you're not entirely reliant on Arts Council funding, but we don't ask for much by way of match funding. And really talk about, in your proposal, about the time span of the project. What's the start date and what's the end date? But we're flexible. Once you've been awarded a grant, we can work with people around where costs have gone up or where the project time span has increased. But we can't fund work that won't reach people in England, things that have already happened, school or university courses, or, as mentioned, core business costs. We've had a real focus in National Lottery project grants in recent years on unlocking collections, really as a way of helping to sort of say we are really interested in applications that focus on museum collections. At the moment, this priority runs until March 2026, but these types of projects are always eligible. We just wanted to really sort of highlight them. So for these, it's about a reinterpretation of collections. It might be something about, a wider sense of the cultural value of collections. It might have a decolonizing angle, or it might be around other ways to spread access to collections through digital means. It might be around collections review and improving the display of your objects, or improving the standard of collection storage. But again, you would need to emphasize the public benefit aspect. I think it's really important. We're all in museums. We all value the engagement with collections. Really think about putting collections at the heart of your application. Tell us about your objects. Tell us about the stories that you could unlock through your objects. Highlight audiences and help us to understand how the project will engage with local as well as perhaps new and diverse communities, and how you're thinking about broadening your audiences. You'll never make your museum, it's not that we're sort of saying absolutely everyone wants to engage with all types of museums, but we know, as we heard earlier, that family audience is a really, really good one for you to focus on. And think about raising the ambition. We're really keen to have those wider interpretations of stories. So, think about what makes a good idea for a project, think about a match funding element, and really centre both collections and audiences within your bid. So a couple of examples. I mean, this is a quite extraordinary museum, isn't it? Pal Cotton Museum in Kent. They applied for a grant which in our terms is quite small, just under £15,000, and it was a community-led reinterpretation of two museum cases of objects from Uganda and Kenya. And the aim was really to recontextualise the objects and stories and redress the current outdated interpretation, which was quite sort of empire-led. And it resulted in a case study as well, which was shared with others. And that was, again, an important part of the bid, because it was about defining the benefits. So it enabled 10 local people of African and Afro-Caribbean descent to co-create and reinterpret. And it's part of a larger project to reimagine the museum to be more inclusive. But it also helps in terms of other benefits. It helps build trust with communities who may have felt marginalised by museums. It helps build the skills within the museum and the people who are engaged with the project around curatorial museum work. And colleagues in other organisations are benefiting from the case study and from the learning. In terms of how it was submitted to Arts Council, this linked with our strategy outcome of cultural communities, but also it's absolutely about ambition and quality and inclusivity and relevance. So, it was an easy project for us to support. Slightly more ambitious in terms of the ask, so just under 90,000. This is unlocking the Light Infantry Archive at Bodmin Keep, Cornwall's Regimental Museum. And this is about a documented archive. I don't know what vetted by Army Heritage Branch means, but it sounds intriguing. And it's made available for wider public research. And an artist was also commissioned. And this involved partnerships, so that earlier talk from the MA, from Sarah, about equitable partnerships. It's really good to see partnerships in bids as the ask becomes bigger for more funding. We really value seeing partnerships within an application. And it involved light infantry veterans recording oral histories, providing testimonial of their experiences of conflict, and the interviewers received trauma-informed training to help ensure an ethical approach to gathering sensitive histories. So in terms, again, of the application to Arts Council, the long-term benefit was around all the museum visitors benefiting from a more in-depth narrative, more benefit for researchers in the archive, a benefit for the light infantry veterans and partners in the project, and again, colleagues in other organisations, so that sense of dissemination of good practice. It was another one that came under the outcome of cultural communities, but also a creative and cultural country. And again, in terms of the investment principles, this was about ambition and quality and inclusivity and relevance. I wanted to flag the Museum Development Small Grant Scheme because museum development funds are easier to come by. They're smaller amounts of funding. I mean, I think £80 is the smallest museum development grant, but they can go up to about £10,000. And we have 5 area museum development providers covering the whole of England. They also fit with Let's Create, and they are, again, framed around our investment principles. But I'd really encourage you to go and speak to your local museum development team about what grants are available, have a look at their websites, and see if they may run on a deadline, cyclical basis. But I just think they're a really good way to start to build confidence around applying for Arts Council-related funding. It's obviously been a really big year for military-themed grants with the Victory in Europe and Victory in Japan 80th anniversaries. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But also museum development grants can be about organisational development. And this just shows how you might want to think about them fitting under the investment principles. But I think that's fairly straightforward. But again, AMOT and museum development can help give you guidance on how to navigate the Arts Council language. A strong application to museum development grants would articulate how the funded activity will support the museum, and it would link to at least one of those 4 investment principles. They're really easy to access. They don't involve our grant portal, which, as I've mentioned, has already broken down, but we have a workaround. But it's a very straightforward application process. And as I mentioned, MD support isn't just for project grants. It can also help with fundraising activity and wider organisational development. So I'd really encourage those of you who haven't to look at your local MD provider. But it was really interesting on those earlier slides to see that more than 80% of you are regularly, or at least have in the last 5 years, applied for grants. With this opportunity around the 80th anniversary of VE and VJ, this was funding that came from central government, and Museum Development distributed it for us and supported 21 museums across England to do additional commemorations. And a really nice example was the Fusiliers Museum in the Tower of London, receiving £15,000 for their Victory in Europe 80th commemoration project. They produced 2 films from archival footage and a community outreach programme in Tower Hamlets. So again, it has those ingredients of working with the collections, being sort of the moment and relevant, and linking in the local community. And there's a nice quote down the side. So I'll just finish up by summarising. If you take away one thing from my talk, I'd really like you to take away the fact that Arts Council England is absolutely interested in your museum and collections in England. Sorry about that. And that we have project funds available to support your museum and collections, either via museum development or our National Lottery project grants. Please do read our strategy and get a good sense of what we're looking for and how to present your project in a way that makes it easy for us to support you. And please do apply. We'd love to have more applications from military history museums. We find that museums are under-applying for our funds. I think it's our branding. Those that do apply, there's quite a high success rate, it's around 50%. And again, museums don't often apply if they've been rejected once, whereas what we see with artists is they just keep coming back and they get there. So think about the feedback if you're not successful, but don't be put off applying. It might just be about timing, or it might be about reframing your project slightly. But as I mentioned, AMOT and Museum Development are absolutely here to help. And although we have had some problems with our grant application portal online, we are open and back for business. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Can I just ask the criteria for applying? You said it had to reach people in England. Now, physically or digitally or whatever, because I noticed on the map you put up of the museums you were supporting, there seemed to be some in Wales, there seemed to be some in Scotland.
That's such a good question, because
Yes,
we have in the
I thought it was a good
we have in the
question.
past funded the Welsh National Opera because they've toured in England as well as in Wales.
Yeah.
So I think I'd encourage you to look at our criteria really closely and do talk to Museum Development, because there might be ways, if you were doing something online, there might be ways to demonstrate that you're making your project available to audiences in England. The vast bulk that we fund are England-based, but you're right, there is that sort of subtle nuance in the criteria.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Good. Now, Lancaster.